Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I'm beginning to believe remote viewing is in fact real and takes time to become one with it. Not only does it give you the present, but also the past, and quite possibly the future. Here's an experience I had. I was dreaming, but somewhat vividly, but also segmented, that I opened a door to a bedroom in the morning to find some girl rising from the bed, alarmed at my intrusion, as if she had been doing something. Within the next moment, I'm hearing a conversation and a phone call about how he was awoken by someone opening the door while in the middle of some activity. This short conversation was a highlight because I heard it loud and clear. I also remember holding a phone and the feeling of preoccupation whilst talking, but I cannot recall any other visions. The audio was clear and very distinct, and I felt a sinking feeling, possibly from REM. During that morning when I awoke, I checked my Facebook to find 2 posts about how one's young nephew had intruded into the bedroom, disrupting her and her lover's sleep. Other times, I would be in a state of tiredness common to most people, where you would awaken yourself from your head movements. Around these times, I get images or a segment of reality with clear audio-visual, but only for a brief moment where it is highly detailed. One of them was seeing a girl fixing her hair, and while talking, I could only get a few words as if I had tuned in a radio station. I believe that most of my experiences are remote viewings of the present, while I am asleep. I'll get segments or periods where I'm at a party somewhere. If I am asleep during the middle of the day, I might get a visual of being in traffic or driving to a destination. Again, I only am able to tune in for brief but highly vivid moments, during which I sometimes feel my body sinking, a roller coaster feeling. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments?
Awareness can observe stuff, and it has no mass. Practice moving your awareness outwards from your head. Seems that you want to be as free from mental and emotional barriers as possible, so basically meditating out in the wilderness will strip your emotional body of inhibition in self-perception. Seems there are complementary mental forces. Think of the branches of the lobes in your brain, like leaves or petals of a flower. You can start moving these branches of energy to perceive differently, like practice independently setting one side over your temple and the other on the wall or something. Sort of making mental projections that can reach out of your mind into the world. You could also think of them like wings of perception. Move these wings where you wish to see, and the motion of energy will act like radar revealing the vision. Get out of your own way. Ego is what we are habitually placing in the center of awareness. When you drop needing to filter through the ego, you can place awareness wherever you wish. Sort of like seeing the mind, seeing with the mind, seeing beyond the mind, seeing beyond seeing. Or just meditate a while until you perceive hypnagogic imagery. Sort of rising lights in your mind like phosphins. Then mentally probe the field of energy and practice reaching out to real objects. Crystals seem conducive to this practice. It helps a lot to study stars and the universe. Your mind will create perceptions of what interests you. If that's TV or Facebook, your mind will think about that. If it's looking through a telescope, your mind will start creating imagery of stars like you are looking through the telescope. It can actually be very helpful to play with optical devices like lenses and mirrors. You want to practice visualizing the effects that the optics create, only using your mind rather than the senses. This technique is more akin to building a mental thought form telescope and then pointing at something you wish to observe.
How is it that you can be caught remote viewing a subject? How is it that other beings are able to perceive your perception? Just try to remote view Saturn, and you'll immediately know what I'm talking about. There have also been accounts of other people being caught while viewing their targets, and it seems to be possible regardless of time. In one account available in one of the CIA and FBI papers, the viewer was looking at the society on Mars, but in the past. He managed to view his perception further back in time and saw shadows of people. Upon interacting with one of the shadows, he began to question it and receive answers. Only the shadow was capable of perceiving him back and thought it was a hallucination. How does that work? Dick Allgeier, when viewing Giza in the past, apparently encountered a weird hatchery, which was being overseen by some kind of mantid. The mantid was able to perceive him and gave impressions of, "This is none of your business, please leave." What exactly is going on here? At first I was looking at Saturn in a general sense, and I wasn't getting much except for the feeling of decay. It's hard to describe, kind of like Saturn was something else at one point, but now it's in a process of unwinding. As I got curious about the hexagonal storm, I immediately started to feel sick to my stomach, which made it almost impossible to continue. I couldn't hold focus anymore, but I got a brief sense of mass before I was sort of kicked out. Even now, there's a feeling of heaviness. It's hard to explain. The feeling is hard to shake, though. That feeling of mass was really intense.
I think we are connected to beings which are connected with everything. We are not those beings. Those beings have been trying to bridge the gap of understanding between life and themselves. They operate on the fabric of the universe, outside of physical restraints. You can find them dotted around Earth, known as hallucinations. But if given the right amount of time and a difficult amount of learning to process the information, sometimes you can hear people's prayers and reply to them on behalf of the beings. People keep calling me God during the early hours of some mornings, and I can see people who are dying in different circumstances. It's a difficult role to understand because it's hard to tell what is made in your mind and what is being projected into it. But it's fascinating to explore the creative processes of the brain with a spiritual guide who uses what you have learned through the day as a catalyst to mold your brain into receiving their messages. Only suckish part is that it's not always in English and needs translation. Last night I received a message but was unable to decipher because my imagination has been dampened by an anti-psyche, so things aren't as clear as they used to be.
I may semi-understand what you are describing. When I was really young, like 5 to 6, I would have dreams where I would wake up after a dream, nightmare, potentially sleep paralysis, not so much a lucid dream, in blackness, with a feeling of a presence and heaviness, but not on my chest like in sleep paralysis, rather all around me. Like how you described a mass, and I felt extremely tiny, and as if it was staring at me. If that helps, I instantly thought of that when you described the feeling as heavy and uncomfortable. It was really an uncomfortable feeling, like being spiritually violated. I was so young and had no concept of any of this, and a relatively normal life, no abuse, violence, etc., apart from almost drowning and having an out-of-body and near-death experience at the age of 4.
I'm just going to interject here. I have psychic abilities. Anytime I bring them up anywhere, people want them demonstrated, even if there are just randoms I've only known for a few minutes, and who will be gone shortly after. The only times I've demonstrated my abilities was when I decided to carry out an experiment, sought out participants, and went through with the experiment and got results. Every time I connect with someone, I feel what they are thinking and feeling, get caught up in their mental storm to some degree, and have to wash myself of them after. Their attitudes, thoughts, feelings, etc. are entrancing for me. One man who practices a lot in my area and who I run into from time to time, who is also very read up on William Walker Atkinson and all these other books too. He explained morality to me as simply a system for not wasting one's time. In life, there are many dramas and time wasters. Trivia, useless knowledge, games, family, pursuit of wealth, getting into fights over one's honor, philanthropy, helping others, etc. Most ethics is just about not getting into conflict and not pursuing various vices, keeping your heart and mind on the real goal. In order to actually advance, I have to spend all my time in practice. I certainly don't want to be known for who I am and don't want to be bothered. That hasn't stopped me, though, from demonstrating my abilities to people, including online in tiny chats, back when tiny chat was a thing. Just, it's always been on my terms. Usually I prepare beforehand with hours of meditation and weeks of general practice before that, and then when I'm ready, I go find some people to experiment with. By the way, if you want to be good at remote viewing, most of the techniques given for remote viewing training are total trash. Psychomancy is a good book on it, so are the Swami Panchadasi books, but I'll describe quickly what should be your starting practice. First, grab something like a piece of blank paper or any other simple object with a single color. Endeavor to see in your mind that color. Really try and see it. Just like in the practice in seership Hindu and Oriental methods, linked in the description. Next, just try and see an object completely with your mind, an object that you literally have right in front of you. Don't bother with any coordinated remote viewing and similar stuff until you can actually see in your mind the objects that are right in front of you when your eyes are closed. When you can finally do this, you can progress to stuff like the envelope experiment or a simpler experiment I've thought of, which is you put dice or other objects in a box and maybe a light to illuminate in there if you want. You shake up the box and you then visualize the box in your mind and use imagination to see inside of the box. You then check what you saw in your mind as the contents of the box with what you actually see when you open the lid. Eventually, you'll be able to see the dice or whatever is in there every time you open the lid. Now, you can move on to more complex targets. The envelopes thing is psychometry, and you can just hold an envelope in your hand and see in your mind what is on the papers in the envelope. Later on, you can do coordinate remote viewing and get mind-blowingly accurate results. Some of the people from the CIA have stuff up on YouTube where they do their remote viewing, and they are wildly incompetent. They basically make vague scribbles, and they see symbols that are very general, and then they reinterpret what they've scribbled or described to make it fit with the target. This is total bull.
When my eyes are closed, I just see black.
Visualize something and intend it reflects and reproduces the phenomena. Try visualizing a mirror and see what it shows you, for example, or visualize a fog or light and condense it into the scene you want to see, or visualize a box and open it, intending to see something specific inside your imaginary box.
But that's imagination and not seeing.
You're misinterpreting it because you're too literal-minded. The imagination is a second sight, also can be called the mind's eye, inner eye, or whatever you want to call it. These aren't fancy, special occult terms in picking up from somewhere, just little poetic phrases I've heard used. It is not as literal and clearly visual as reflected photons from objects hitting your eye and being presented to you after assemblage in your visual cortex. Of course, you literally see black when your eyes are closed, but you can also imagine with closed eyes, say, an apple, and in a strange way, see it in your mind even while you're literally seeing the blackness of the backs of your eyelids covering your eyes, or like reading a book and having the situations, characters, and imagery formed in your head while reading it. I don't know what goes on in your head, and perhaps you can't even visualize such an apple, like some infamously can't. So, if that's the case, then I suppose you should just do other things that are more up to your speed. This inner sight, or second sight, I believe, is the one involved in phenomena like clairvoyance and remote viewing and precognition.
The thing that trips me up is that dreams throw a wrench into this. You literally see stuff in your dreams, so it's not as simple as imagination strictly being, you literally see blackness but you see what you are imagining.
The phenomena in dreams are being perceived the same way that imagination is. The only difference is that your attention is wholly focused on it when you're asleep, while when you're awake, you're being distracted by other things.
I think there is an overlap, but dreams can subjectively be even more vivid than imagination, because the parts of your brain involved in such phenomena, let's say like the visual cortex, are actually being lit up, stimulated, and hallucinating those scenarios for you. The visual cortex is in the occipital lobe, and a quick Google search shows the temporal, occipital, and other parts of the brain are indeed being stimulated during dreams, which includes the visual cortex.
Yes, I can close my eyes and visualize an apple or a box with an apple or the desk in front of me. I guess everyone can. But that's nothing complicated, so I don't think that it's a skill to learn before you try to coordinate remote viewing. And the seeing you mentioned sounds differently. I apologize, maybe I am missing your point.
I wasn't the initial guy you were responding to and who wrote that green-texted quote. I was just trying to elaborate on what he seemed to be saying. I don't know how well his protocol works, but it may very well work. Again, you still won't be literally seeing anything, but it'll be like having a vivid imagination scenario in your mind's eye and inner eye, etc. If my experiences are anything to go by. If you want my own experiences, which may or may not be trustworthy and reliable for everyone else, as we're all relatively unique. I was not explicitly and specifically interested in remote viewing, but had it spontaneously start happening to me years ago when I was deeply interested in and studying different mystical teachings and yogic spiritual practices. What I came to was essentially every once in a while and as much as I could, which increasingly became more and more as I strengthened my capacity for this, to try to mentally stop my associations and train of thought and remember myself, remember that I'm a conscious aware being, or simply that I am, which eventually merged with having a sensation of my entire body being here now where it was, and more vividly taking in the sights around me. This was also with attempted periods of self-observation, trying to see what was going on in my machine, excuse me for repeated autistic quote marks, or what my body, emotions, and thoughts were doing at the time, and seeing whether this was going on with true consciousness or semi-consciously and automatically. For some, this protocol might sound very similar to the fourth way teachings described by Ouspensky, and that was indeed a big influence. But it could also just as well describe Zen, yoga, Tantra, or some Sufi teachings and practices. This led to greater and greater, more frequent moments of inner silence resembling what's traditionally called meditation, or dhyana, samadhi, and so forth. Yet it was in the midst of ordinary life situations instead of while cross-legged in the lotus position with closed eyes like many typically think meditation is. Eventually, daydream-like situations started popping into my head, or my inner eye, ear, mind's eye, and ear, or imagination, that actually were what was going on in other places at the time with people related to my life. For instance, sensing people's specific emotions about me while I wasn't actually with them physically at all. Then later having this confirmed when I met them. Hard to describe, really. The examples I give would be too trivial and specific, but this happened repeatedly, beyond coincidence. Or hearing, in my imagination, not a literal voice, what they were saying about me, then having another friend spontaneously bring up to me what was said about me by someone else while they were hanging out. Or even seeing scenarios that were yet to happen, but happened to me in the very near future, like in the next day or two, confirming these daydreams as somehow reaching beyond time and space. It came from cultivating a certain type of inner silence, self-observation, self-remembrance, and the occasional practice of stopping my thoughts and taking in everything through my immediate senses as vividly as I could, in my experience. Later, I learned this could be called remote viewing, but it was not the spectacularly controlled type of remote viewing, as of seeing what's at some coordinates written on a piece of paper you know nothing about. Instead, it was remote viewing of stuff immediately and emotionally linked to me. Classic names for some of these phenomena would be clairvoyance, clairaudience, and precognition, and I believe these all overlap with remote viewing. Again, at the time, I didn't consciously know much about remote viewing, nor was I deliberately trying to experience it. So, with a grain of salt, this may be a different way to cultivate it. At the time, though, I was searching for enlightenment or God through these practices. Not something miraculous, so perhaps even the desire for something miraculous might be an impediment. If you take such practices out of their context, I don't know how well they'd work universally. These experiences also helped me to easily understand what OP and others seem so frustrated about. Where's the proof on camera and in scientific experiments of such paranormal phenomena? First, obviously what I experienced can't be shown on a camera. Second, it wasn't entirely volitional and had to be about stuff related to my life. It's not like I could bring it up on command in a lab. Maybe I could, but I never tried to and don't care to. Third, it's not like I either wanted. A, people to think I was insane if I claimed such experiences and tried to demonstrate them, or B, the attention I might get if I tried to make some fuss about them. Finally, for the people even more spiritually advanced than me, who I'm certain exist, these caveats would apply even more. A theoretical, wandering hermit Chinese Taoist master wouldn't want to show these things off, or they wouldn't by definition be a Taoist. A hypothetically miraculous Sufi wouldn't perform miracles as parlor tricks. In fact, by definition, the miracles would have to be for a deeply spiritual purpose and done by the will of God or a transcendent spiritual principle, by God working through them after they've subjugated their human ego to God, not just at the whim of the theoretical miraculous Sufi, etc. Sometimes there may be exceptions, I'm sure, and miracles or unusual abilities latent in the human being are shown semi-publicly, but I assume it's rare.
I tried it myself and it worked, to my great surprise. I worked with zoologists who tried to locate a specific monkey species in Indonesian jungles. Considering the size and density of those jungles, it would be impossible to just scour them and happen to find them. So they requested help from one of their departments at the French Society of Zoology that experiments with remote viewing. I myself planned the organization of their expedition from a technical standpoint and would provide technical support on the spot, and I ended up giving them a hand with this remote viewing thing, which sounded like insanity. Every time I came, I was shown a map of some place in Indonesia and asked to focus on the monkeys and point them somewhere. They had people who worked there do this every day for tons of different projects. After 5 months and about a dozen participations from me, we were ready for the expedition and left for Indonesia. Our first stop was one of the places mostly determined by remote viewing, which wasn't exactly where they expected to find monkeys because based on regular studies, it didn't fit their environment, and it was quite far from where they were previously sighted. We ran into a group of them on our way less than 2 kilometers from our destination. After a few days, we left again for a second place that was 50 kilometers away, and number 2's strongest area on the remote viewing experiment. It led us to a vast open area, where we found an even bigger group. We walked those jungles for days without running into anything significant, and some zoologists thought this monkey didn't even exist because it hadn't been sighted for decades, so it's no coincidence. I guess it works. I also know of a company in France that finds underwater rivers with remote viewing, and it seems to work. Though it'd be easy to call bull, you can pretty much dig anywhere in France and find an underwater river as long as you dig deep enough. But still, I could believe it.
With out-of-body experiences, it could be said that the person has not left their body at all. Rather, what has happened is that they have opened up their mind to the R=0 domain, and they are absorbing data from everything in their immediate vicinity. Because they are receiving different data from what they normally get, in particular, they are collecting data from seemingly impossible locations. The brain becomes confused and, in some cases, tries to account for the discrepancy by imagining that the mind has moved outside the confines of the body. It constructs a coherent image of what it is witnessing, and this corresponds to what is known as an out-of-body experience. But in fact, it has nothing to do with anything leaving and existing outside the body. Rather, it is a case of the mind expanding beyond its normal boundaries and creating a different relationship with the body in which it seems to have gone beyond the confines of the body. Eileen Garrett, a medium, was reported to be able to go into a trance and project out of her body, allowing her to visit remote locations and observe them. While she was in her apartment in New York, she apparently made a prearranged visit to a doctor's office in Iceland. The doctor had placed a number of objects on a table for her to identify, and this she did successfully. She also repeated verbatim a passage from the book he was reading before she arrived, and observed a bandage on the doctor's head. The doctor confirmed all of this, and also revealed that he had sensed Mrs. Garrett's presence. Note that he did not see any sort of body. This episode is consistent with our previous account of an out-of-body experience. A person's mind can remotely access other locations and use all of the R=0 data available including the thoughts and sense data of any person at the distant location, to construct a mental picture of what is present at the other place. The CIA's remote viewing program may be considered an application of the out-of-body experience concept. The viewer is expected to supply information about remote locations simply by looking at pictures and information regarding the target. In another well-known example of the out-of-body experience phenomenon, a man was on a ship caught in an Atlantic storm. During the night, he had a dream in which his wife visited him in her nightdress and gave him a reassuring kiss. Although he made no mention of this dream, his cabin mate teased him the next morning about his midnight visit from a lady. When he got home, his wife asked him if he had received her kiss. She said she was worried by reports of the severity of the storm and wanted to know if he was safe. She had visualized flying over the ocean to find his ship and his cabin. She said a man on the upper berth looked straight at her. She was able to provide accurate details of the man in the cabin. In this instance, the cabin mate reportedly saw the woman even though she wasn't physically there. Given that it was midnight and the cabin was presumably in complete darkness, perhaps he meant that he sensed her rather than saw her. If he did see her, then it could be argued that he was tuning into her subjective image of herself rather than an objective representative in physical space. The important point is that in the R greater than zero paradigm, no one needs a detachable second body that travels immense distances in a short time through the air. Rather, their mind is able to expand and enter into other parts of the R equals zero mental domain, where they can retrieve data impossible to access through any conventional means. Near-death experiences. A special type of out-of-body experience is the so-called near-death experience. Jung, following a near-fatal heart attack, described it as follows. I found myself in an utterly transformed state. It was as if I were in ecstasy. I felt as though I were floating in space, as though I were safe in the womb of the universe, in a tremendous void, but filled with the highest possible feeling of happiness. Can describe the experience only as the ecstasy of a non-temporal state, in which present, past, and future are one. Everything that happens in time had been brought together in a concrete whole. I was interwoven into an indescribable whole, and yet observed it with complete objectivity. This might be said to be a description of complete immersion in the IR equals zero domain. Jung gives further details of his experience. He mentions a sensation of floating away from the earth and viewing it from an increasingly great distance and experiencing the whole phantasmagoria of earthly experience being stripped from him. He reaches a door of a temple wreathed in flames, then enters a hall where he meets people to whom I belong in reality. Finally, he finds himself at peace in a serene and beautiful garden. A typical near-death experience involves the perception of the separation of an immaterial component from the physical body. The body can often be seen being left behind. The immaterial self then seems to travel perhaps in the ordinary world, where people and events may be glimpsed distantly, or perhaps to an unfamiliar world, as in the case of Jung. The return to earthly life and consciousness can be perceived as unwelcome and traumatic. The person often wishes to remain in his new realm.
I once had a dream where I was visited by a group of I don't know what, but I was shown a portal I couldn't explain. Never got a good look at who arrived as they never made an appearance. Be me. Wake up, in my bed alert to the knowledge that I was being approached. The wall at the foot of my bed opens up a hole and out comes a sphere similar to a diver's sphere. Smooth and shiny .png. Before anything happens, I'm told I am chosen among a few others to witness this marvel. Nothing better to do. I agree to play along. A door opens up and the other chosen are inside. Far more spacious than it looks on the outside. Evenly spaced windows with benches line the perimeter with some visitors looking out. Take a seat, and then we are all told the demonstration we are about to be shown was known as a submersible. Looking out my window within this submersible, I stare at my own window within my room. I almost appreciate the bright moonlight spilling in when I see another hole open up where my window was. Getting a good look of the edges, for some reason, the holes kinda remind me of the Mandelbrot set. Distracted by the squiggly edges, the entire submersible glides forward. This thing, I'm told, is new and capable of diving under the fabric of space and popping up anywhere else within that same space. To provide a simple example, we go through this hole and I'm subjected to stimuli I can't currently explain easily. The lights were definitely green, and the patterns were otherworldly, like glass and jade forming transparent green snowflakes. Time is gone, so eternity persists, and before I know it, we're out on the other side. A few feet outside in my backyard with the same moonlight spilling onto the concrete. This is where I wake in my bed without so much as a goodbye. One of the most vivid dreams I've ever had.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.